We are live.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our March meeting of the genealogy group. I'm going to do some housekeeping things at the end, but right now I'm going to get straight to the program and introduce Mr. Matthew Parrish. He is the curator at Whitehall Shrine, just north of Richmond. He actually lives here in Berea and has spent quite a bit of time here studies and otherwise. He's been curator for the past 4 years. And even as it transitions to new ownership, he is still the curator, thank goodness. We are all happy to hear that. And he received his master's in history from EKU in 2024. So it's all yours, and we thank you for coming.
Oh, yeah. Thank you guys for having me here. First of all, I have to say I can tell this is a pretty rowdy group. So if anybody can just keep it down while I'm going, it'll be appreciated. But yeah, so like Janet said, my name's Matthew. I work out at Whitehall. I grew up here in Berea, and my parents actually work at Berea College. So I've always kind of known about John Fee. I actually knew about John Fee before I ever learned about Cassius Clay.
All the way down.
I started working at Berea College just as a summer job a couple of years ago, and I would give history tours of the campus, and this was before I worked at Whitehall. And that's when I can't remember if I learned it before, but when I sort of discovered that, Cassius Clay and John Fee worked together to get Berea College started. And so, no, I'm not, speaking any ill of anybody, but it was interesting to find that while I worked at Berea College, nobody ever really talked about Cassius Clay. It was all about John Fee. And then when I started working at Whitehall, learning about Cassius Clay, there was nothing at Whitehall in the tour script that I was first given that said anything about John Fee. And so as I started learning about the relationship, I thought somebody's, got to talk about how these guys worked together to start not only the school of Berea, but the town wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for these two Kentuckians. So I did an internship at Berea College Archives, and I got to read a lot of letters of John Fee's and Cassius Clay. So everything that I talk about here, since I know y'all are a genealogy group interested in research, everything that I talk about here is in Cassius Clay's memoir, John Fee's memoir. Both of them are free to read online, and of course the John Fee and Cassius Clay letters, which are all pretty much at Berea College Archives. So this lecture that I'm going to give talks about Cassius Clay and John Fee's relationship, how they were different, how they also had a lot of similarities, and how they come together to start Berea. So to get started, a bit of background about the state of Kentucky and what's going on around the time that Cassius Clay and John Fee start working together. So Kentucky was designated a slave state when it first becomes a state in 1792. I've done a little bit of research on the numbers, so this 21% isn't across the board, but on average between 1800 and 1860, about 21% of the population of Kentucky was enslaved. So that's just amazing to me. It really makes you realize, how big of a deal slavery was in Kentucky. That's almost a quarter of the population. We're not just African Americans, but also enslaved. However, Kentucky is a unique slave state. It's got a lower population of enslaved people compared to other states like South Carolina. A lot of other slave states had laws prohibiting education. There's a lot of slave states that have laws that make it really difficult to emancipate enslaved people. But Kentucky is different because it doesn't have all of those laws. There was no laws that prohibited enslaved people from being able to learn how to read and write. I actually, when I first started working at Whitehall, I found a note somebody had made after doing research. Cassius Clay's father, Green Clay, apparently actually was teaching enslaved men that he owned how to read and write so they could be enslaved overseers of Whitehall, the plantation there. So kind of a unique thing there. And that'll come into play kind of later on. And so the state is really complicated because it's right on the border of North and South, and it's also kind of far west at this point too. So within Kentucky, you have everything from slave owners, especially in bluegrass region, Lexington, Richmond, owning a large amount of enslaved people, kind of a plantation class going on. But then you also have northern cities where you have a lot of abolitionists working, and then you have people all in between, all throughout the state. So it's an incredibly sort of complicated situation. And within that arises these two men, John Fee and Cassius Clay. So a little bit of background about John Fee. He's born in Bracken County, northern Kentucky in 1816. He says in his memoir that he was born into and grows up in a slave-owning family, but he always knew it was wrong. So when he is a young man, he goes up north to Ohio and attends the Lane Theological Seminary School in Cincinnati in the 1840s. And at that seminary school, a very, at that time, radical idea is being taught, which is, slavery should be immediately outlawed. It's a Christian sin to own slaves. And so John Fee becomes this hardcore radical abolitionist. Really interesting thing with Fee, he was given land in Indiana by his father, but he ended up selling that land so he could buy the freedom of an enslaved woman that basically raised him as a boy, named Juliet Miles. So in terms of being anti-slavery abolitionist, John Fee, especially as a Kentuckian, is as pretty much as abolitionist as you can get. So John Fee's main thing is that he believes that slavery is a Christian sin and should be abolished absolutely immediately. After he's done with his schooling at Lane Seminary School, he comes back to Kentucky to spread his ideas. Really interesting things that he does. He publishes a guide on how to free your slaves that he would give to slave owners. Because there's all these different ideas about why slavery needs to continue, and there's a lot of ideas about being thrown out about how it can't end because it's going to destroy the economy and all that kind of thing. But John Fee basically wrote a step-by-step guide of what he thinks everybody should do, and he would pass it out to people who own slaves. He was also distributing Bibles to enslaved people, which he gets in trouble for on a couple of occasions. If you think about it, a lot of enslaved people were taught to be Christians, but you find that not a lot of enslaved people are actually given Bibles. And there are actually, I don't know about Kentucky, but in farther southern states, enslaved people are sometimes given they're called slave Bibles, and they have all these stories of enslaved people in Egypt and things like that, all those stories about the slaves escaping and finding freedom, the promised land, they're all taken out. So basically John Fee would sneak around to plantations and hand out actual Bibles and tell people, read these stories, that this is the real Bible, that it tells you that slavery is bad. So he gets into some trouble for that. He preaches against slavery. He goes around, he travels around Kentucky, but almost every town that he goes to, he basically gets chased out by the people who live there, slave owners. So he can never really find a stable place to call his home. It's really interesting reading his memoir. He actually has this amazing part where he writes about when he decided he wanted to become an abolitionist, and he said it was sort of a meditative moment. He sat down underneath a tree and he just sort of thought to himself and realized, I'm probably not going to live very long. I'm probably going to be killed for this. I'm probably never going to have many friends. I'll probably never get married, but this is what I'm going to do. So John Fee was willing, at least he says in his Bible, in his memoir, to basically give up everything for this cause. So that's John Fee, radical abolitionist, a reverend, a preacher. The only thing that he cared about was the Bible. Then you get Cassius. So Cassius Clay has a very similar upbringing to John Fee, and a similar way that he becomes an anti-slavery advocate. Born in Madison County, born in Richmond in 1810. The family that he's born into, the Clay family, they're at this point the largest slave-owning family in the state. So he's even more of a slave owner than John Fee's family. In 1828, his father, Green Clay, died and willed Cassius Clay, the Whitehall, the house there, the home, 2,200 acres around that home, and all the other land he owned in Madison County, and 20 slaves. He all gives to his youngest son, Cassius, who was just about 18 years old at the time. But that same year, he starts to go to school. 1828, he went to Transylvania University in Lexington for about 2 or 3 years, but he gets an opportunity to go to Yale for a year. When he goes to Yale, he attends a talk given by abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison, and he says in his own memoir that it completely changes his life. Cassius claims in his memoir that he always felt uncomfortable about slavery. He says that when he hears that Garrison is going to give this talk, he has never heard about Garrison before, but as soon as he learns that he's an abolitionist, he gets excited about it. He said he went to the church where the talk was going to be given, and he said he finds a seat in the front row. He wants to hear everything that Garrison has to say. And I'm going to try to quote him directly. He says, like water to a thirsty wayfarer were to me Garrison's arguments and sentiments. So it was like a breath of fresh air. He realizes that there's this movement that he can join. There are other people like him who disagree with slavery. So he returns to Kentucky, and he decides that he, just like John Fee coming from the north to the south, is going to come back to his home state and try to fight slavery from within. But here's the different thing about Cassius. Cassius was not an abolitionist. He's not quite as upfront about it like Fee was. Cassius is more concerned about slavery on an economic standpoint. Cassius Clay viewed slave labor as competition for poor white farmers in central Kentucky. He also thought that the slave agricultural system that was going on at that time was holding Kentucky back. He wanted Kentucky to become an industrial economy, an industrial state, like more northern states like New York and places like that. He viewed it as all these slave owners. There's just a small population of people in the state, and they own all the land and they have all the money. And so Cassius kind of wanted to redistribute that wealth to more kind of middle class, working white Kentuckians. He's not really too interested in rights for enslaved people. So that's what makes Cassius confusing. In a lot of his speeches and writings that he gives, he doesn't really talk about what he thinks should happen to these people after slavery is done away with. He never really advocates for the right to vote. Cassius Clay's main thing that he kind of latches onto is he comes up with sort of an idea. It's a 30-year plan about how slavery can be phased out over a period of several decades. So Cassius Clay is not an abolitionist, he's an emancipationist. So he is in the Kentucky State House of Representatives. He gets elected in 1835. And it's interesting that he's not in the House for very long. He loses a re-election in 1841, and that's because you can see in Kentucky's politics the question of slavery as time goes on is becoming more and more of a heated topic, and less people are willing to listen to Cassius. So after 1841, he doesn't win the re-election to the Kentucky State House. But that does not stop Cassius. He was not one to be ignored, if you know anything about Cassius Clay. So a couple years later, in 1845, he starts an anti-slavery newspaper in Lexington. It was called the True American. This is a photograph of not what the building looked like when Cassius was working there, but that is an old photograph of the building where the True American office was. It was an anti-slavery newspaper printing right in downtown Lexington, only a block or two away from the actual slave market in downtown Lexington. So what a political statement that is, right? I tell people on my tour it'd be like setting up a vegan health food store right next to a butcher shop. Like the placement is important to what's going on. While he's doing this, this is where John Fee comes into the picture. So in the early 1840s, and you can actually read the letter yourself, it's at the Berea College archives. John Fee hears about Cassius and he writes Cassius Clay a letter. He's telling him about who he is. He's telling him that they have very similar ideas, it sounds like. And so a partnership is struck up. John Fee starts writing for Cassius for the True American newspaper. So a lot of True American articles that you read that are from this time, a lot of the articles John Fee wrote for Cassius Clay's newspaper. It wasn't actually meant to change the minds of slave owners. It was targeted at poor white Kentuckians living in Lexington, and again, people who Cassius felt were missing out because of the competition with slave labor. It was more of a poor. It was targeted at these poor white Kentuckians, basically telling them these slave owners that you keep electing into the House and to the Senate, they're not working for you. They don't have your interest in mind. All they're worried about is getting as much money as they can and keeping it for themselves. So that's who they're kind of targeting with this newspaper. The True American does not last long at all. Only a couple of months after Cassius Clay formed this newspaper, it gets attacked. And before that, he kept on receiving death threats and things like that. So that's where this cannon comes into play. If y'all have ever been out to Whitehall, you've seen the Cassius Clay cannon. He actually bought 2 of these. It's actually about this size. They're brass cannons. He said in his memoir that he purchased them from Cincinnati, mounted them inside of the True American office, loaded with nails pointing right at the front door. So he was absolutely certain that a mob attack was going to come, and Cassius Clay felt that he needed to be ready for that. So that just shows you the danger that came with anti-slavery work at this time. Despite the cannons, despite Cassius being ready to not go down without a fight, the office is actually attacked, and the newspaper press is dismantled. Basically, what happened was Cassius Clay gets sick. He gets typhoid fever. He's living in downtown Lexington in the 1840s, so it's no surprise there. And he was basically bedridden, and all of his enemies heard that he was sick and thought, this is our one chance, guys. So there's a group that get together. They actually, this is crazy to note, they actually get a warrant. They go to a judge and they get an actual legal document that said that they were allowed to go into this private business and destroy it. And they get it from some local judge who already doesn't like Cassius Clay, and it's on the grounds that it is disrupting the peace of the town. After this all happens, they actually put the newspaper press on a train bound for Cincinnati. Cassius Clay hears about it, and he basically sues the people who were in charge of the mob, and actually ended up winning. But he does keep the True American office in Cincinnati. It closed down by 1847. Cincinnati was awash with tons of other anti-slavery newspapers, so they didn't really need the True American. So it doesn't last for very long. But it's important because this is where Cassius Clay and John Fee begin to really actually work together. Both of them were dealing with a lot of danger. And in John Fee's, in a writing, where a letter that John Fee wrote to Cassius, he calls it glorious work. So this is the glorious work that was going on. Both of them are attacked on a couple of occasions for their anti-slavery sentiments. However, Clay was a lot different than Fee. This is why I call the title Bibles and Bowie knives, because these are the weapons that are used by these two men. Cassius Clay was not a pacifist like Fee. He is totally willing and almost wanting, it seems like, to get into fights with people about slavery. He dueled another Kentucky politician in 1841 by a man by the name of Robert Wycliffe Jr., who was also a big slave owner but a pro-slavery advocate. They get into the duel because they had gotten into an argument about slavery, but mainly what causes the duel is that Wycliffe mentions Cassius Clay's wife in his speech that he gives. So Cassius, being this sort of aristocratic Southern gentleman, challenges Wycliffe to a duel. They duel with pistols in Louisville. Neither of them get hurt. But that is not the end of it. 1843, Cassius Clay is shot outside of Lexington. He was at a pro-slavery rally at a place called Russell Cave. If y'all been to Lexington, familiar with Russell Cave Road. Russell Cave was a meeting place where people would have political rallies and picnics. Wycliffe was actually at Russell Cave giving another pro-slavery speech, and Cassius Clay was arguing with Wycliffe in the crowd when a man named Samuel Brown interrupted Cassius and called him a liar, ended up pulling out a pistol and shot him in the chest. Cassius Clay ended up surviving because he had a Bowie knife in his vest pocket, and the sheath had a silver tip, and it caught the bullet right over his chest and saved his life. So amazing story there. Happens again, 1849. 1849, the state of Kentucky was going to have a state constitutional convention. Madison County was allowed 2 representatives. Cassius Clay was dead set on being one of those 2. He was up against a man named Squire Turner. They were going to meet in Richmond, and they were going to debate each other, but a fight breaks out. Cassius Clay is struck with canes. He actually gets stabbed in the side, but he ends up surviving that one too, and actually kills a man named Cyrus Turner, Squire Turner's son, in that melee. And this is actually one of Cassius Clay's knives here that we have on display out of Whitehall. But just to give you an idea of what Cassius Clay was like, I've got a quote from him. He was at the True American. He was given a note by some just random person saying, if you don't get out of town and stop this newspaper soon, you're going to have trouble. There's a group of us. There's many of us, and you can't deal with us. So stop this newspaper. And Cassius Clay actually sends a note back, and he says, tell your secret conclave of cowardly assassins that Cassius M. Clay knows his rights and how to defend them. So kind of a cool quote there. John Fee, similar situation. However, John Fee is a very strict pacifist. He does not ever fight anybody, but don't let that make you feel like John Fee was sort of a meek figure. He was almost even braver than Cassius. In 1856, Fee was kidnapped by a mob. They were in Rockcastle County. He was preaching down in Rockcastle County, and a group of men break into the church that he was preaching in and actually grab him by the collar and drag. Can you imagine grabbing a preacher and dragging him out of a church, thrown onto the ground, and they tell him, "You're coming with us. We're taking you out of the county. When we get out of the county, we might even kill you. We're going to decide that on the way, but you're coming with us." They pick him up, and he refuses to get on the horse, so they actually have to pick up his body and place it on. So he's just not giving them any inch of leeway. As they're marching Fee out of the county, he's basically preaching to them. He won't stop talking. They get to a farmhouse, and a huge thunderstorm erupts. So this mob and Fee all go into this farmhouse, and they wait out the storm. What an awkward moment that must have been, sitting around quietly and with this mob of people that might kill you. John Fee asks the homeowner if he has a Bible, gets the family's Bible, and stands up on top of a table and starts preaching to his captors. And according to his memoir, by the time the storm's over, half of them have left. So by the time they get him out of the county, there's only, according to John Fee, like 2 or 3 men left in the mob. They actually kind of feel silly now because they've ended up deciding they're not going to, because he's a preacher and he's actually making some pretty good arguments. So they let him go. This whole time that this is happening, John Fee's poor wife, Matilda Fee, is in a panic. She doesn't know where her husband is. She's gotten word that he was kidnapped while he was down in Bracken County. So can you imagine, the poor people of Berea, they're not even looking for this. They know he's dead. They're basically looking for his body. They passed by some person who said that they saw a preacher on a mule headed back to Berea. So they run back, and Matilda gets back to the Fee home, and she finds John Fee on the floor playing with their child. So he brushed it off. It was nothing. It happens again in 1858. Fee and a man named Robert Jones, one of the other founders of Berea, were also kidnapped. They were taken to the Kentucky River, and Robert Jones was actually beaten almost to death. He almost didn't make it out. Just an amazing situation with Fee, because this is his own memoir, but according to his memoir, after they got done basically trying to kill Robert Jones, they turned to Fee, who took his own shirt off and knelt down and basically just offered himself up to them. And somebody in the mob piped up and said, isn't this guy a preacher? I don't know. And they all kind of had a meeting, and they decided they would just let him go. So John Fee and Robert Jones rode back to Berea, and Jones ended up surviving, luckily. Fee was shot at in his house. He doesn't really give a whole lot of detail about this, but he says in his memoir that while he was in his house in Berea, somebody rode by and actually shot at him. He writes in his biography that he was beaten, he was stoned, people would spit on him as he walked down streets of other towns. So kind of like Cassius, he's really not afraid, it seems, of this opposition. I think this quote is from the first kidnapping in 1856. People had told him before he went down to Rockcastle County that a mob was forming and they might come and try to get him. And he says, "I came here to do my duty, and when the mob shall come, they will find me at my post." So just an amazing quote there. This is John Fee's Bible. This is actually also at Berea College Archives. It's a cut Bible. You can see that there are sections cut out. I still need to look at this Bible a little bit more, because I don't know if these are things that he agreed with and he cut them out to put them in his notes, or maybe he didn't agree with the Bible. Maybe it was kind of like a Thomas Jefferson Bible kind of situation where there were parts that he didn't agree with and he just cut them out. So really interesting thing there that is at Berea College Archives. So I got a little bit ahead of myself. I'm going to go back to how Berea actually first got started. So Cassius Clay, like I said, in 1841, he loses an election. In the mid-1840s, while he's trying to print his newspaper, he's trying to figure out how to get back into local politics. So it's my opinion, honestly, that the idea of Berea that Cassius Clay had would basically start his own town so he could get a following and more people would vote for him in Madison County. What better way to secure a vote by starting your own town? So he wanted to spread his ideas of emancipation by creating sort of an anti-slavery community, a whole town of non-slave owners who are all going to agree with him. So John Fee is offered by Cassius basically to be entrusted on starting this community. Gives him $200 and originally 10 acres of land here in Madison County, which was in an area called the Glade. Y'all might already know, but basically here in Berea, if you're down in that area where there's the Glade Baptist, it's a church. There's also like a Little Caesar's Pizza. That was the Glade there, about 10 acres. That's what John Fee is originally given by Clay. How it goes down is that there was already a church there. Cassius Clay, that was basically his property. So he told Fee to go and preach at that church, and Fee told Cassius that it went great. Everybody who showed up, there were a lot of women there. There were a lot of anti-slavery people there. It was one of his best sermons that he ever gave. So Cassius says, "Okay, let's start a town." 1854, John Fee starts his own church, and then by 1855, they start teaching. So it was originally this building here. It was like a meeting house that they originally used as a church and a school when Berea first gets started. The school is a really, really big deal, and really without the school that would grow to become Berea College, the town wouldn't even be here. John Fee had met people at Oberlin College in Ohio. Oberlin College was also an integrated school in the early 1800s. So John Fee's idea is, let's start an Oberlin-like college down here in the South. And maybe that education could kind of spread these ideas throughout Kentucky. A big part of Berea was that there was no tuition, and that's how Berea is now. That's how it always has been. John Fee didn't want a school just to educate rich kids who were already well educated anyway. He wanted it to be a situation where anybody could come to this school. Poor white farmers, children of enslaved people, anybody could go to this school, and they didn't need to even have money. And as somebody, John Fee and Cassius, they were both, they both knew a lot of anti-slavery people all around the country, so they get a lot of donations. So that's how the Berea school is originally able to function. Some teachers actually leave Oberlin College and come down to Berea to start teaching there. And so it becomes this weird little oasis in this desert of slave owning. It's really amazing. It was the first integrated college in the southern United States, and it was the first co-educational college. So you can see in this photo here of young Berea students, there's boys, girls, everybody was going to Berea. An integrated school in a slave state. Pretty amazing. However, things do not go well for very long. And part of what happens is infighting between Cassius and John Fee. Like I said earlier, they're both really different guys. Even though they're anti-slavery, Cassius is more of an emancipationist for economic reasons, and John Fee is a hardcore abolitionist for religious reasons. 1855, this is a letter at Berea College. Cassius Clay writes a really snarky letter to Fee, and he's basically saying, tone it down, you're scaring people. He asks Fee to not use offensive language while giving sermons, and he also pleads with him to avoid gesticulation, which means that Fee was, throwing his fists in the air and pounding the pulpit. He would get into it, and Cassius Clay starts to think that Fee is taking over operation. This is, in terms of what Cassius believed, this is his town, and Fee's starting to do his own thing with it. So he tells Fee, do what I tell you, calm down. We're going to, work on this anti-slavery thing, but we can't have people around here thinking that you're going to try to start a slave revolt or something. Things get even worse and basically come to an end in 1856, just a year after the school opened up. Cassius had gotten invited to Berea by this small kind of early version of a town to speak at the 4th of July celebration. And I don't know what was up with Cassius Clay, but he shows up in a mood. And the schedule was that Cassius was going to speak first, and then a couple people from the college would speak. But according to John Fee's memoir, Cassius shows up and tells Fee to go first. Fee knew that something was up, but he goes anyway. He gives basically a sermon that says that although slavery is legal, although it is, a law in Kentucky that slavery is okay, nothing is above the law of God, and the Bible and God say that slavery is a sin. Cassius follows Fee and basically starts to debate him at this, what's supposed to be just a little 4th of July celebration. He says to his face, he calls John Fee a dangerous radical abolitionist and says that although slavery is bad, nothing is above the law of the Constitution. So isn't it interesting? The Bible, the Constitution, battling it out here in Berea. Fee was absolutely furious, and Cassius basically decides now that John Fee is becoming way too radical. He's making way too many enemies. And basically pulls his support from Berea. A big part of what was going on at that time is fear of slave revolts amongst slave owners here in Kentucky. 1848, there was this mass sort of self-emancipation about a group of 75 enslaved people from different plantations and farms. They all meet in Lexington, and they start going north to try to get across the Kentucky River. Somehow they were able to find firearms. There were men, women, and children there. So basically a group of almost 100 people trying to get across the Ohio River into the free state of Ohio. There was a man in this large sort of group named Jack, who was an enslaved man owned by Cassius. He actually left Whitehall and joined this group, and he was actually arrested. John Fee was accused of smuggling guns to this group. I don't think he was ever actually put on trial, but everybody around the area thought that he did. I don't know if he did or not. I don't think he would have, because John Fee was a pretty hardcore pacifist, but he's kind of involved in this whole story too. So with John Fee and Berea College, the main fear is that Fee is basically starting an armed revolt that's going to happen. And nothing makes it worse than this guy here. I'm sure everybody knows this guy here. Anybody know what I want to say? So John Brown, very good. John Brown gets Fee into quite a bit of trouble. So John Brown leads this slave revolt out west in Kansas and Missouri in the 1850s. 1859, John Brown and a group of his followers try to take over the Harper's Ferry armory, federal armory in what's now West Virginia. And of course, John Brown is killed, and a lot of his followers are as well. However, John Fee, after all this has happened, and now this is, national-wide headlines, and everybody's talking about it, John Fee decided one day to give a sermon, and basically what he says is that although the violence cannot be excused, the actions of John Brown are what needs to happen to end slavery. And he actually says in his speech, I believe I'm quoting him mostly directly, he says, "We need more men like John Brown." And everybody in Kentucky went, whoa, that's a big deal. And all these fears, and I'm not saying John Fee was actually going to start an armed revolt. He was more like saying that we need dedicated people as dedicated as John Brown to do this, willing to risk their lives to end slavery. But what everybody heard was John Fee saying, let's kill all the slave owners in Kentucky. So what happens is, after this 4th of July celebration that happens where John Fee and Cassius Clay kind of had a falling out, Cassius Clay had been paying armed guards to stay in Berea to guard the school, and Fee, well, guess what? After they have a falling out, Cassius took his guards away. Now the small community is at the mercy of these slave owners in the area. So a couple of years later, 1859, when this whole John Brown situation happens, a mob of slave owners get together at Richmond, the Madison County Courthouse, and they ride into Berea as an angry mob, and they tell everybody to get out. And if they don't, they're going to be killed. John Fee was not there. He was out of town. I believe he was in Cincinnati. But there's a lot of people in town who are basically forced out, or else they're going to be killed. So an interesting thing happens. The person sort of in charge while Fee was away was the principal of Berea, J.A.R. Rogers. There's a photograph of him and his wife. Rogers and people at Berea, they actually send word to the governor of Kentucky, and they requested muskets and a cannon. Nothing gets back to them. They get absolutely no help from the state government. So they're basically thinking, our town is under attack. We need help from the state. The militia's not coming, so we'll try to protect ourselves. They don't get anything, as far as I know. J.A.R. Rogers writes a letter to Cassius Clay, the famous duelist and Bowie knife fighter by this time. And he says, Mr. Clay, we need help defending our town. What should we do? And Cassius writes a letter back, and he tells them to basically stand down, which is crazy. Cassius, in all the writings I've ever heard, he's always talking about fighting and willing to die over slavery. He tells J.A.R. Rogers, John Fee, their families, and everybody at Berea to just be quiet and do what the mob wants them to do, which I almost can't believe, but that's in the letter. 1860, about a year after this all happened, Cassius Clay tries to kind of save face, and he writes a public announcement sort of denouncing the actions of this mob. But by then it was too late. Everybody had already left. The Civil War is about to get started. Berea is basically put on pause. So all these things that happened between Cassius Clay and John Fee have some really big repercussions. I will say it was maybe almost a blessing in disguise, because then the Civil War comes, and of course 1862, the Confederate armies from Tennessee invade Kentucky, and they came right through Berea here. Matilda Fee writes about some Confederate soldiers breaking into her house and stealing blankets and things like that. John Fee, while the war is going on, he's helping out at Camp Nelson, where there's a lot of black soldiers and their families, and he's telling people the whole time he's at Camp Nelson, I've got this place called Berea. It's an integrated school. We're gonna get it running as soon as this war is over. Just hold on, but it's gonna happen. Meanwhile, Cassius is basically gone. He was appointed the minister to Russia by Abraham Lincoln. He was trying to become a general during the Civil War. During the 1860s, he basically has nothing at all to do with Berea College anymore. But of course, it is interesting because Kentucky remained part of the Union, so that makes it kind of tricky for Berea, because while the Emancipation Proclamation passed, Kentucky was still a Union state, so slavery is still legal. So they're still not really able to get this school running until 1865, when the 13th Amendment passed. But after the war is over, John Fee, being the guy that he is, he comes back and they get started right where they left off. 1866, they start the school again. They call it the Berea Literary Institute. A lot of the students that come back to Berea or come to Berea after 1866 are people like this guy here, Angus Burleigh, who was a soldier at Camp Nelson, who had met Fee and had heard about Berea. Found out that he actually, right after the war is done, he walks from Camp Nelson all the way here to Berea, and he was one of the first students to graduate. 1869, Berea officially becomes a college. It was offering a 2-year degree, basically, but it also had all these other schools for younger children, or at least people learning how to read and write. There was a nursing school, there was a teaching school, so it was a whole community of schools that made up Berea College. Oops, I'll go back here. The school is really interesting when it starts out, and Berea itself, the community, was so unique because of Berea. Because of course, even though slavery is now illegal, this was the only integrated school, not only in Kentucky, but in the South, really. Berea sold plots of land to families coming here to go to the school or to work at the school. And if you've ever been to the Berea College archives, they have a sort of a 3D map. And you see that basically it was kind of like a rule. The different black families and different white families, they had to live amongst each other. There couldn't be a white part of town and a black part of town. They made sure even the buildings were integrated. Berea grows and it grows. More people are coming to the school. It officially becomes an actual town in 1890. And I found this is really interesting. Madison County had the largest amount of black-owned farms in the state, about 13% compared to about 5% statewide by 1900. So this is sort of becoming, like I said, an oasis amongst a desert of inequality at this time. So as an epilogue to end things, despite their falling out after Cassius gets back from Russia, they still write to each other, John Fee and Cassius Clay. Cassius Clay was a founding member of the Republican Party, but he does some party switching. That doesn't really help his political career. He joined the Democrats, and then he went back to the Republicans. But anyway, 1875, this is also at the Berea College archives. Fee wrote to Cassius. He had heard that Cassius Clay had joined the Democrats, and Fee basically writes this scolding letter saying he's disappointed in Clay for doing so. But they still keep up almost like a friendship. 1888, Fee, there's a letter again inviting Clay to see him preach in Richmond, Kentucky. But this is kind of telling, another letter that I found at Berea, 1895, Clay wrote to the president of Berea at that time, William Frost, basically bragging and claiming that Berea was his school and he started it. So this was always kind of Cassius Clay's opinions. 1903, unfortunately, of course, the Day Law goes into effect. Carl Day, a state representative, came to Berea, saw a graduation happen, and he saw that there were black and white students all kind of mixing together, and very quickly passes this state law, the Day Law, which made it to where every school in the state, even a private school like Berea, had to be a segregated school. Berea tried to fight this law, but it ends up getting passed anyway. But to end on this, I've always found this interesting, and you might think it's just a coincidence, maybe so. But notice, Fee dies in 1901. Cassius Clay passes away in 1903, the year that the Day Law goes into effect, and happened before the Day Law. So I've always thought it was interesting. These two guys, these two older men by this time, it's still, I almost wonder if nobody wanted to mess with them. I also found another letter that Cassius Clay wrote to William Frost, the president of Berea. I couldn't figure out what had happened from the context, but Cassius Clay is writing, and he said that he heard that something bad had happened in Berea. Perhaps some people showed up in town and they were causing trouble and making people scared. Cassius Clay wrote the president, William Frost, saying that he wished he could have come down with a shotgun to put a stop to it, but he says in his letter that his aim is not as good as it used to be. So just I always wonder if these two men, while they were alive here in Madison County, nobody could touch Berea. But then as soon as they're gone, the Day Law goes into effect. Might just be a coincidence, I don't know. But folks, that's pretty much the end of my talk here. I appreciate all for listening to me go on and on and on for a while. And I guess y'all might need to talk some more, but does anybody have any questions before we end here? Question over here. Yeah.
Well, I don't have a question. I just got a couple of comments.
Yeah.
First of all, that was an excellent presentation.
Oh, thank
I just
you.
really enjoyed it. I just wanted to comment that Robert Jones that you mentioned,
Yeah.
he is my third great grandfather.
You're related to him.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
And I may have misunderstood what you were saying, but on Feast's Bible where the places are cut out.
Yeah.
I've always heard that he went through his Bible and cut out every snippet of information about slavery.
Okay. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I maybe he used them for notes or something like that he had, but like these were passages that he really liked in particular. So maybe he cut them out so he could have them in like a journal or something. But yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, that's so cool. You're related to Robert Jones. What amazing. Yeah, that story in his memoir is really kind of chilling. He talks about Robert Jones being, almost, beaten to death. And then the mob, for some reason, lets them go. And he says that he and Robert, I think they ride back to Berea. I think they had like a mule or a horse or something like that. So, and John Fee makes sure that they get back safe. So really amazing stuff. Yeah. A question back there.
Yes, I have a question. With Kentucky being long east to west, you're talking about slavery in Madison County.
Yeah.
What I'm wondering, I was born in Ohio County, and I met people who were descendants of slaves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what I'm wondering is, at the time of this particular history, how advanced was slavery in the western part of the state?
That's a good question. I don't know a ton about what was going on out west, but I'm sure plenty of plantations were out there. It's different with eastern Kentucky because of all the mountains. So I think that's kind of why Cassius thought this area would work perfectly, because it's right on the border of eastern Kentucky, the mountains, very little slave owning going on there, and then Madison County, which had a ton of plantations. So it's this really kind of interesting border there. I think he thought that it could maybe work well. Out west, I'm sure there were plenty of plantations, slave owners, and enslaved people. I don't think there was much of an anti-slavery movement out west. Yeah. It seems like it's mainly going on up north on the border of Ohio. And that's what makes Cassius and John Fee so amazing, because they were working right here in the middle of a war zone, basically. And Cassius Clay was actually from Richmond. But a lot of the people who were anti-slavery, they were like John Fee. They were from northern Kentucky. They were from more kind of city areas. John Fee's family owned slaves, but nowhere near as many as the Clays and these other families that lived here in Madison County.
Yeah, just on the personal side, you mentioned Lexington.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was an undergraduate at the University of Kentucky,
Yeah.
I visited and spent a lot of time walking the streets in downtown Lexington.
Mm-hmm.
I was surprised and appalled to find as a history student
Mm.
that Lexington was, I don't know how it ranks in terms of size, but it was a huge slave market.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I think it was the biggest
I think
slave market in the state, if I'm not wrong about that. And Cassius Clay lived in Lexington a lot. I mean, even though he lived, the main sort of home was Whitehall out in the country. I mean, the Clay spent a lot of time in Lexington. And so, yeah, that was the big sort of market there for all that. Yeah. Yeah.
Was the day law with public and private schools education in effect until the Civil Rights Acts?
It was in effect until 1950, I think. So I think it actually ends for Berea a little bit before all these Equal Rights Acts passed. Is it 1950 or 55? I'm fuzzy a little bit on that, but I think it was 1950. So Berea is one of the first schools to go back to being an integrated school. And when the day law went into effect, they did start the Lincoln Institute, kind of closer to Frankfurt, but it wasn't as big as Berea. And also at this time, Robert Frost, or not Robert Frost, what am I thinking of? Anyway, William Frost, the president of Berea. I don't know. William Frost is a really kind of complicated and problematic person because he does a lot for Berea after the day law passes. It's his kind of vision that it's going to be a place for all these poor white kids from the mountains to go to. But it kind of seems like that the interest in Black students going to Berea starts to dwindle when William Frost takes over. I've actually seen a letter. This is a letter at the Berea College archives from Frost. He wrote it to a friend of his, and he writes it about he had just accepted being president of Berea College. And Frost, as a little bit of context, he was from Ohio. I think he had gone over, but he was from Ohio. He was also a preacher, reverend. And he says, and I believe I'm quoting him here directly, he says to his friends, the laziness of the South has permeated Berea. So he's kind of viewing Berea as this backcountry place where he thinks it needs to not only modernize, but it seems like he's a little bit more, it seems like he was racist, is what I'm saying. And less Black students start coming to Berea at the time that William Frost is president. When the day law goes into effect, Frost and the other people fight it and take it to the Supreme Court. So I'm not saying Frost allowed it to happen. He's a very controversial person. I got off topic there. I think I got off your question.
Basically, for 50 years in
yeah.
Kentucky, it was illegal
Yeah.
to have an integrated private or public education.
Yes,
and I wasn't taught that in history. I'm Kentuckian.
Yeah. So the day law passes.
We weren't taught that.
Yeah, the day law passes 1904, and it's in effect until I think it was 1950, 1955. And the interesting thing about the day law was that my wife is throwing up numbers 54. 1954? Okay. So yeah, basically 50 years. And the very important thing to know about the day law is that there were no other integrated schools in Kentucky. It was only Berea. So this whole entire state law is passed to target specifically Berea College.
But it hinders every other school too.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah.
They were just an example.
Exactly. Yeah.
My mother went to Fleming County. She graduated in 55 or so. It was not integrated.
Mm-hmm.
I went 18 years later.
Mm-hmm.
I assumed it had been integrated forever. It's like we weren't taught this in school.
Oh no,
we were not taught these nasty things.
Yeah. No, the day law really just it's these Jim Crow era Kentucky politicians.
It was the force of the law.
Yeah, they were making sure that these communities would not integrate, and not just the school, but the towns themselves. And then when the day law passes, you start to see a lot of these Black families who own farms and who worked at Berea. They all moved. All that the Berea College had Black faculty members. They have to go. They're forced out. So it completely changes the state, but it really set back Berea 50 years,
But
basically.
it's like the whole state.
Oh, yeah, the whole state, absolutely.
You had to go north.
Yeah,
probably.
yeah, absolutely. And there were black schools, but there were no integrated schools. So yeah, it was a big deal. Yeah.
Berea College, a number of years ago, put on an exhibition of letters and other materials from Carter Woodson.
Yeah.
And Woodson, I read it with fascination, the letters that he
Yeah.
handwritten. It was handwritten. He hadn't gotten a typewriter yet. He was living in Europe.
Mm.
And the college, Frost was trying to raise an endowment of $500,000 by asking famous people to donate money.
To the school. Yeah.
And Carter
Yeah.
Woodson is opposed and says he will not donate.
Mm.
And he goes to the wrong, as you're suggesting, criticism of Frost
Yeah.
for not doing enough.
Yeah. Like I said, Frost is very a controversial person, and what he is known for is keeping Berea going after the Day Law passed, because a lot of bad things happened. For one thing, black students and black faculty members are no longer legally allowed to go to Berea. But here's the important thing: Frost makes the call to make Berea an all-white school. He could have made it a college for black students and black faculty members, but he decided not to. He decided it was going to be, yeah, that was a critique amongst a lot of people. And the funny thing, well, not funny because it's all bad stuff, but Fee was still alive when William Frost became president. And Fee, I think he hated Frost. There's this really kind of funny picture of him at Berea College archives. It's old man Fee sitting in his wheelchair, and he looks mad. And it's Robert Frost like standing over him, and he looks all proper and everything. At Berea College archives, they have notes. They're not even letters. They're just quick little notes that William Frost would, that John Fee would write to William Frost, critiquing him. You're not doing this right. You're not doing this right. You should be doing this. So Fee did not like Frost. So everything changes in 1904, and that's actually the year that Carter G. Woodson graduates. Everything changes with the Day Law and Frost being president. But now what Frost is known for is keeping Berea going. Him and his wife, they go into the mountains, they go into towns, they start telling people about Berea. More students start coming. There's more funding now coming because now that Berea is no longer an integrated school, all these civil rights activists stopped giving money to Berea because there were no more civil rights. So now these philanthropists start giving more to Berea again because there's poor white students going. But yeah, completely changes Berea. Yeah, back there.
Answer the question about Western Kentucky versus Eastern Kentucky.
Yeah.
I've been recently reading about feuding families in Eastern Kentucky.
Sure.
And a lot of the families in Eastern Kentucky resented slave owners
Mm-hmm.
and slavery and knew that the plantations and that flat land out in Western Kentucky was
Yeah.
ripe with plantations.
Yeah.
And they even resented the slavery because some slave owners tried to mine coal with slaves. And
In Eastern
that was
Kentucky.
violently opposed, and even some of the slaves and slave owners got shot at many times and run out of Eastern Kentucky so that white people could work the mines and make the money.
And see, and that's important because that's exactly what Cassius Clay's arguments were. He viewed slavery amongst its evils. Yeah.
That came back to Kentucky after the Civil War
Mm-hmm.
met up with Democrats from Western Kentucky and other opposing places. And right in this area was sort of a border.
Yeah.
The area between Crab Orchard, Kentucky, and Lincoln County was mostly a lot of the Democrats that were pro-slavery.
Yeah.
And they formed the Ku Klux Klan a whole lot, and that was where the feuding began. And a lot of it was in the Rock Castle area.
Yeah.
It's sort of the borderline of the area. So yeah, Western Kentucky was more of the plantations, pro-slavery.
Right.
Eastern Kentucky was a lot of your Republican and abolitionists, and
Right,
they opposed
right.
slavery, and they didn't have any slaves because they were up in the mountains.
Yeah. Absolutely. Cool. I saw a bunch of cans go.
Can you elaborate on how Berea College kind of moved up the hill from the Glades to
Yeah.
present location?
That's actually, I'm glad you asked me, because that's not something I know a whole lot about. I've sort of just done a lot of research between Cassius and Fee. I guess it sounds like that they start growing and growing, and so they start buying more and more land. But that's pretty much all that I know about it. Yeah, yeah.
Knowing a little bit of Cassius Clay's families and everything else, the Clay family owned property up this way where Berea College actually is. Some of that land after he lost his home in down there, when he lost his land, some of that land was sold up here and it went to Berea College.
Okay.
There's actually a couple of cemeteries around here that actually have some of the slaves of Cassius Clay.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Also, the day law cost kind of cut off people's nose to spite their face because they had to still educate the black students, so they had to send them to private schools.
Right.
So if you were around here or in Estill County, as far as Estill County, they would board you all the way down in Louisville at Lincoln Institute. Lincoln Institute's in Louisville.
Right.
And my father went there. All of his high school years was at Lincoln Institute.
Right.
By the time I was born and was able to go to school, we lived in Milwaukee. When we moved back here, I had started first grade, and I went to a one-room school, segregated school, Brassfield, out here in out of Brassfield for 1 year, and they integrated the schools the next year, and I went to Waco. And it was a troublesome time at that time. Just riding the school bus was a big thing. The bus drivers didn't want to pick us up, that kind of things, and everything else. But it became it wasn't economical for them to board us and send us to boarding school, pay for us to be in boarding schools all the way down in countries in Louisville, by Louisville and everything else.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons too, plus Reconstruction and stuff.
Yeah, and that was why Berea, before the day law was so important. It was one of the only schools around here. I mean, a lot of the students coming to Berea, they weren't from. I'm probably sure there were some local people, but there were people coming from all kinds of different counties all over the state. So yeah, as soon as it basically closed to half the population of people that would be going there. What a huge change. Yeah, what a huge blow.
My great grandmother went to Berea College in the elementary portion of it.
Yeah.
And when they changed the day law, she dropped school right there. They didn't went any further.
Yeah. So she could have been able to go on and get a college degree. Day law comes along, you're done. And there's no other nearby schools to go around.
And see, at that time, they needed the family at home to work the farms and everything else. If they didn't have time for people to ship their kids.
Yeah. No, Berea was. I'm so glad you said it. It was such an important opportunity for so many people, not only in Madison County but this whole surrounding area. And then it just gets cut off. So crazy change. Yeah. Yes, sir.
You didn't mention much about Clay's family, but him and his wife divorced.
Yes.
And that didn't happen a lot in that era.
No.
And his daughters, in particularly, really disowned him.
Yes.
Yeah. Their mom, who moved back to Lexington.
Yes.
And they became very famous in state women's suffrage and national
women's suffrage movement. Yep, absolutely.
And
Yep.
one of them, I think it might have been Mary Barclay, was the first lady that was nominated to be president of the United States.
That was Laura, another Clay daughter. Yeah, a little bit younger than Mary Barr. No, so yeah, Mary Barr Clay, one of Cassius Clay's daughters. So Cassius Clay and his wife get this divorce. The cause is very complicated, but it involves an illegitimate child from Russia. So it's crazy business. But yeah, they get a divorce, and Mary Jane Warfield Clay, Cassius Clay's wife, she leaves Whitehall, and a lot of their children had already grown up by then. And according to, again, Kentucky laws at this time, it's very unfair. Married women were not allowed to own property. They legally could not. So Whitehall, the land around it, all the items inside, furniture and all that legally belonged to Cassius, and his daughters were, of course, just completely disgusted about how their mother was treated in this divorce. So they go on to become, women's suffrage advocates. And Mary Barclay is a huge person to know because she basically gets the ball rolling for other Southern suffragists. She becomes one of the first Southern women to get involved in the suffrage movement in the 1870s. Laura starts a group called the Kentucky Equal Rights Association, advocating for women's rights. And she does in 1920, several Democrats cast, it's a Democratic Party convention, and several representatives vote for Laura to be their candidate for president. Now, the interesting thing, kind of tying it into all this, these Southern activists, especially Laura Clay, did not advocate for Black women to be able to vote. And in fact, in 1920, when the 19th Amendment passed, or I guess a little bit before it passed, Laura Clay stepped down as president of the Kentucky Equal Rights Association, her own group, out of protest because she didn't want Black women to be able to vote in Kentucky. So just like the Deluge, it's so complicated. There's so many different things going on. The women's suffrage movement in the South was totally different than the movement up north. Laura was also against prohibition. The people who got prohibition passed were these women's rights activists, and Laura was against it. So really kind of the Clays, I tell people on tours, Clays were different. they played their own game. They did not care which side you were on, as long as you worked for them. So interesting people there. Yeah.
Just an aside, Cassius Clay, when he went to Yale to study law, is when he became a Baptist.
So Clay is complicated in his faith, from what I've been able to find, because he writes this really interesting part in his memoir. He says while he was at Yale, he attended a church. But he said in his memoir, on his train ride back home to Kentucky from Yale, he read through, and this is in his memoir, so who knows if he actually did it. It might be more figurative, I don't know. But he says in his memoir that he reads through the Bible, and he says he cast it aside, and he writes a letter to the preacher that preached at the church he had gone to, and he said to strike my name from the list. And he kind of goes on for a while about how he doesn't really believe in that there should be like denominations of Christianity. And he also notes in his memoir that his father, Green Clay, was a deist. So I think that played a big role in who he was. But he was, his funeral was at the Baptist church in
here's
Richmond,
the
right?
twist. He deeded the property there at Main and Lancaster to the regular Baptist church.
That was Green, I think.
Or Green.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So Green,
Yeah.
and that's also kind of a humorous thing, because Green, like I said, was a deist, or at least according to Cassius, he was a deist, and does a lot of bad stuff during his life. He sues people a lot, and he owned a lot of slaves. And just a few months before he dies, he suddenly donates land to a group of Baptists. Yeah. So I think maybe he was possibly trying to right some wrongs there. I don't know. But yeah, Green Clay deeded land to this group. It was a particular Baptist.
They kept switching their names.
Oh, okay.
I've been with the assistance of Deputy Clerk Cody back here.
Okay.
We pulled deeds, and they can't decide if they're regular, particular, predestinarian.
They're quite confused.
They
They're very confused.
Yeah, they keep switching their name.
Interesting.
And then the missionary or United Baptist actually bought half interest in the property, and they were splitting first and third Sunday and second and fourth Sunday in the building.
Interesting.
But then the regular, particular predestinarians claimed that there was no such deal, even though the deed exists.
There was a deed.
So there was a lawsuit in 1907 protesting this because the regular, particular predestinarians had just built a new building, and the Missionary United had donated not 1 cent. And I mean, that's literally in the lawsuit. So, there was all this bad blood among the Baptists. Not a potluck, but bad blood.
Right. No, the Green Clay, he donates that land. And it's interesting because Cassius Clay also says in the memoir that his mother, Sally Lewis Clay, was a particular Baptist. So I've always wondered if Green did it for her.
I'm thinking the wife was the impetus to donating the land.
And I think I remember in the agreement that agreement made for the land to be, or for the church to be built. He gives them land so that they can build a church, and he asks if a row of pews can be reserved for the Clay family. And then that's the church that Cassius Clay's funeral is held in when he dies. So there was a connection between that church and the Clays, especially with, Cassius's mother, I'm sure, kind of being involved. I'm wondering, but yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for listening to me ramble on for a while. Hope everybody enjoyed everything. So yeah.
Thank you very much.
Shall I go sit down so you can
Make yourself comfortable.
Okay. All right.
Just a few housekeeping chores. Our meeting next month, third Saturday of the month, as always, will feature Jessica Harrington from the Kentucky Department of Libraries and Archives. We had her back last year about this time, and she ran us through the court system and all the ways the court system changed, and she had all these handouts and charts and so on. This time she's going to come back and talk about looking at historic probate records. So I think that you will enjoy that, and she'll come armed with all kinds of resources and tips and so on for researching probate records. And just a reminder, when I'm scheduling speakers, sometimes I go kind of history angle, and other times I go kind of genealogy how-to, and that's kind of by design. To understand the genealogy, you kind of need to know what's going on and why people moved, or what they were thinking, or what was influencing them, so that you kind of understand what your ancestors were doing. So sometimes people say, why do you have a history lesson instead of how to do a research and whatever? And that's why I try to strike a balance. So I hope that appeals to you and you like that. And so I think we all enjoyed today's session very much. So anyhow, hope to see you next month. Invite a friend, bring them with you. So we're always open to new people joining us. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.